Well, hello everyone. We are going to get started on reading chapter 13 of A Murder for Her Majesty. As you know, our person who has recorded the videos, unfortunately, she didn't finish the entire book. So I'm going to pick up where she left off, starting at chapter 13. And remember what had happened in chapter 12. Um, it was the Christmas party after the event on Christmas Eve, and there was a lot of people there. Also, there are the conspirators that are trying to do something away or do away with Pup slash Alice. So we'll see what happens in chapter 13. Decided to speak to Jeffrey that afternoon before he left for his grandmother's. She knew he would be gone by supper time, and she thought she might sleep better if someone else knew about her troubles. Besides, she was pretty sure he suspected something was wrong, and she wanted to tell him before he asked her about it. She found him in their sleeping quarters, packing up some things he wanted to take with him. Hi, pup, he said when he saw her. She came over and sat down on the foot of his bed, wrapping herself up in one of the spare blankets lying there. It was cold in the room. Jeffrey, I need to talk to you. All right, but can't we go downstairs? It's warmer in the kitchen. No, I'm sorry, but I want to talk to you alone. He nodded and sat down on the bed and picked up, I have to move this, and picked the other spare blanket. For a long time moment, Alice was silent, looking down at her hands as she picked lint off the woodland blanket. At last she sighed. I didn't think this would be so hard, Jeffrey. I'm in trouble, in danger, I believe. You see, my father was murdered, and her voice cut, and she went on in a whimper, and I witnessed it. I know the men who killed him, and I can identify them, and they either know or suspect that. She took a deep breath and went on in a more normal tone. Did you ever wonder about those men in the cathedral that night? Jeffrey nodded, his eyes wide. They were my father's murderers. They were there to meet the other conspirator, the one who planned it, Father Cooper. Father Cooper? Jeffrey explained, his eyes opening wide in alarm. But, Bob, I think he knows who you are. He heard you talking about your father and what he said to Bishop and Scott. She nodded. I know, I saw his face. Her calm facade shattered. Jeffrey, I am so frightened. Awkwardly, he put a hand on her shoulder. Now, pup, he said, trying to sound bracing. Don't worry, we'll think of something. But they're going to kill me, she said, fighting back tears. Not if I can help it, he said staunchly. Now, what can we do? We could go to Master Frost, he suggested. What if he didn't believe me? He'd have to. After all, it's true. Alice made a face. You're such a pair of scamps, she mimicked. Next time, try slightly less fantastic tale. Now run along and don't bother me. But even then, pup, what have we lost? And might he believe us? You can't be sure. She shook her head. Well, we could go to the magistrate. Her eyes widened suddenly in alarm. Oh, good Lord, no, we can't. We are acting on the Queen's orders. At least they said that Her Majesty would be pleased. Geoffrey frowned in concentration. Wait a minute, pup, he said at last. If they acted with the Queen's approval, why would they bother to kill you? Would it really matter if you could identify them if the Queen were going to shield them? Doesn't make sense. I don't know, Geoffrey, but I don't want to take the chance. We'll have to think of something else. He nodded. What about your old master, the one who visited you? Does he know who you are? She nodded. And he didn't tell Master Kenton or Master Frost? Jeffrey asked incredulously. That's amazing. I made him promise not to, Jeffrey. Excuse me, Jeffrey. If I went to London, I know he'd help me. But How on earth would I get there? I haven't any money to speak of, and I couldn't possibly walk. Then that's not the answer. It's a pity he isn't closer to home. She nodded. There's an old friend of my father's who lives in Chelmsford Hall. Do you know where that is? Yes, it's about 8 miles outside the city walls on the road to Leeds. So why not go there? Well, I would, except that when I first came to the cathedral, I overheard Father Cooper say that Lady Jenny was in France and that he would watch Chelmsford Hall. What if he's still waiting on, or Jenny is still in France? Geoffrey raised his eyebrows. It's the dead of winter, pup. How likely is he to be spending all his time shivering in the snow? We all know how much he values his comfort. Yes, but it needn't be him watching. There are the other two as well. That's a point, he conceded. But just then Dame Agnes's voice called upstairs. Geoffrey, your grandmother is here. Coming, he replied. Oh, Lord, he added to Alice. Now listen here. I'll come back tomorrow or as soon as I can get away, and we'll figure out what to do. In the meantime, don't go anywhere alone, and don't tell any of the others what you've told me. There's always a chance that the wrong ears will hear of it. Remember, don't go out alone. Stay inside if you can. Alice smiled wryly. The dame is going to love me, he shrugged. At least it will give you plenty of practice at making up excuses. It shouldn't be too bad, a day or two at the most. And you do see my point, don't you? She nodded. Geoffrey! They heard the irritation in the dame's voice, and a moment later, her footsteps on the stairs. Coming! He cried, grabbing his satchel and dashing out the door. Alice watched him go. With a sigh, she folded the blankets and went back down to the relative warmth of the kitchen. The day after Christmas, it turned bitterly cold. The snow groaned underfoot, and noses and ears grew nearly numb just in the short trip from the kitchen to the woodshed and back. Alice, Orlando, and three other boys who had stayed at the school spent most of their time huddled near the kitchen fire. Alice realized that Geoffrey wouldn't be able to come until it got warmer, and though inwardly she chafed at the delay, she managed to preserve an outward calm. At least, she thought, the dame could hardly fault her for remaining inside. There was little to do in the house, especially since one had to stay near a fire in order to stay warm. So Alice and Orlando passed the time tutoring each other to the disgust of the others. Latin in theory, Alice groaned late in the afternoon on the third day of the cold spell. Some vacation. Orlando nodded gloomily and edged closer to the fire. If it ever warms up, we can go skating. The frost is bound to be frozen after all this. I don't have any skates, she sighed. I wonder what's for supper. The dame looked around from the counter where she was working. Blood pudding, she said tartly, and you could take that look off your face. There are plenty of little boys who would be happy with a nice blood pudding for supper. Mm-mm. And Alice muttered to Orlando, but not softly enough. The dame stomped across the room, brandishing a wooden spoon. Now you listen here, she snapped. You've been surly and disagreeable all day, and I'm tired of it. You've been acting as though someone planned this weather solely to annoy you. Do you think I enjoy having you all underfoot the whole day? This cold is hard on all of us, not just you. Now do your letting and stop complaining. Dame Agnes went back to her work. Alice watched her with resentful eyes. I'm surly and disagreeable, she grumbled. What does that make her? Orlando shook his head warningly, but it was too late. The dame Charles charged across the room, grabbed Alice's ear, and hauled her to her feet. I've had enough of your impertinence, pup. You are going to bed now with no supper, and I don't want to hear a single squeak from out of you. Now go. She rapped Alice smartly across the back with the wooden spoon and shoved her toward the door. Alice stalked off, her chin high, her lips pressed firmly together. She was furiously angry. And you should count your blessings, young man, that you didn't get a beating, for you richly deserve one, the dame called after her. A couple of hours later, Orlando tiptoed to the side of Alice's bed. Pup, he whispered, I brought you some bread for dinner. Thanks. You've got to be wary of the dame when she's like this, foul-tempered as a caged bear. Maybe it will be warmer tomorrow. I'll never be warm again, Alice said glumly. I have to go back down, he said. But I tell you what, I'll try to heat up a brick for you when she isn't looking. He started away. Don't get caught, for heaven's sake, she whispered after him. But he just smiled. The next morning, it was warmer. The wind had brought clouds heavy with snow, and though the day was dark and the sky threatening, they all greeted the change with enthusiasm. As they got off their sleds and skates, Alice watched with misgiving. What's the matter, pup? Orlando asked as he began wrapping his muffler around his neck. Aren't you coming with us? No, thanks, Orlando. I think I'd rather stay here. Well, you can just think again, Alistair Tucker, the dame said rather sharply. You're not going to mope around here under my feet all day. I don't feel very well, Alice protested. I really don't want to spend the day outside. Nonsense! The fresh air will do you worlds of good, the dame insisted. Now get your outdoor things. But no more arguing. The matter is closed. Alice looked at the dame's stern face and crossed arms and realized further protest would be futile. Wait for me, Orlando, she said. He nodded, and shortly the little group was on its way to the fosse. The fosse is like a pond. There was a holiday atmosphere about the river. People had built fires along the banks, some even on the ice. And a few enterprising vendors had set up stalls and were doing a brisk trade in hot meat pies and other delicacies. Alice bought two sticky sweet rolls, one for herself and one for Orlando, and they sat on the wharf eating them and watching some skaters. Pop! Orlando! They turned at the sound of their names. Geoffrey, they cried together. With a grin, he joined them. The dame told me you were here. I stopped in on my way. You aren't going to sit here all day, are you? Randall's here, and he brought his sled. Where? Orlando asked eagerly. Over there. Look. He pointed to a group of children clustered around a sled. Come on, and we'll give you a ride. As they watched, several of the bigger boys took the sled rope and began to run, pulling a laughing load of others along the ice. Come on, pup, let's go, Orlando said, getting to his feet. She looked a little doubtful, but rose also. Orlando set off toward the others, not waiting to see whether she was coming. Geoffrey looked at her with concern. Look, pup, he said quietly as they started after Orlando. There really isn't much Father Cooper and his friends could do in a huge crowd of people, especially if you stay near one of us all the time. I suppose not, she said with a sigh. I just don't feel very cheerful. He nodded. Well, at least you can pretend to be. Come on, hurry. The day passed quickly. Nate joined them a little after noon, and they all went on an exploratory expedition upriver, but their adventure was curtailed when they began to get cold. They turned back to the bustling center of town and found a fire to get warm beside. Someone started a snowball fight and then a game of snatch the hat, and almost before they knew it, it had begun to get dark. It's gotten late all of a sudden, Nate said. I must get home. If you're going back into town, I'll go with you. The others nodded and they all set off. Geoffrey dropped back to speak with Alice. I'm off home. Graham doesn't live too far from here. He shook his reproving finger at Alice's alarmed expression. Now, pup, he chided, you know very well that Orlando's going back to the dames with you, so there's nothing to worry about. Tomorrow, perhaps we can go to Chelmsford Hall. I have a friend with a sledge. Don't worry, so I'll see you in the morning. Then he pitched his voice so that all of them could hear. I'm off home. See you tomorrow. Good night, Geoffrey, the others replied, waving as he went down the street. The others watched him go, then started back themselves. When they reached the Star Inn, Nate said goodbye and turned off the main street toward his home. See you tomorrow, he called over his shoulders. As he missed the minster close, they heard the hour strike. Randall stopped short in dismay. Good Lord, I had no idea it was so late. We must run, or Mam will skin us. Pup, would you mind telling the dame where Orlando is? I've asked him over to dinner and to spend the night. I'd invited you too, but Mam said one at a time. Alice stared at them in horror. You aren't going to go walk with me home? Randall laughed. You know the way. We're late already. Be a sport, pup, and we'll see you tomorrow. But she began desperately. Cut through the burden and minister close, Orlando advised. It's faster. Thanks again, and see you tomorrow. Orlando, wait, she called after him as he and Randall started off at a trot. There's no time, he replied over his shoulder. Then they were gone. Alice took a deep breath and bit her lips together. It wasn't far, she told herself. It really wasn't far, as she had seen no sign of Father Cooper or any of them all day. She just had to trust to luck. The storm had held off all day, chose that moment to break. I'm sorry. The storm that held off all day chose that moment to break. It caught her off guard. The wind came howling down good Ramgate with the snow at its heels. Alice decided she'd better cut through the Battern and minister close after all. It was hard for her to distinguish any landmarks with the snow, and she knew she could find her way home from the cathedral asleep if need be. Besides, she told herself, unless Father Cooper had been following her all day, he wouldn't see her in all the snow unless she tripped over him. Resolutely, she turned up Vicar Lane. From the shadow of the doorway, Father Cooper watched her. He might never have taken any notice of the children if he hadn't heard their voices. Orlando was not a common name, and Alice knew how to make herself heard. With a small, smug smile, he started up the Vicar Lane after her. The minister close was deserted and a strange wasteland of wind and snow. As Alice struck across toward the minster gates, moving like a shadow, she didn't see the cloaked figure following stealthily. As she passed the south door of the minister, Father Cooper made uh-oh. Boo. I messed this up. Let's try this again. Father Cooper made his move. Taking several rapid steps, he caught up with Alice and grabbed her. She opened her mouth to scream, but a fleshy hand stifled the sound. She squirmed frantically but couldn't free herself, so she bit the hand as hard as she could. You cursed little imp of Satan, Father Cooper hissed, cuffing her roughly with his other hand. Alice tasted blood in her mouth and struggled fiercely. She loosened her grip, and suddenly the hand was pulled away. She filled her lungs to scream, but Father Cooper's hand closed around her throat tightly enough to make the world spin sickly. One sound, he ground out, and I'll kill you. She ceased her struggles abruptly, watching him with wide, frightened eyes. That he hadn't already killed her surprised her. Perhaps he didn't mean to kill her right away. As she ceased her struggles, his hold relaxed very slightly. Carefully, fearfully, she worked one of her mittens loose and let it fall to the ground. They were near the cathedral. It was possible, barely, that it might act as a clue. Then Alice heard footsteps. This might be her chance. She kicked Father Cooper in the shin with every ounce of strength she possessed. He winced and cursed under his breath. His hands tightened further, and Alice's world dissolved in spinning darkness. Master Kenton came out of the cathedral and pulled the heavy south door shut behind him. He scowled at the snow and wound his new muffler more snugly around his neck. With a sigh, he went down the steps and started toward the Battern. As he scuffed along through the snow, he kicked a mitten lying on the ground, a small green mitten, just big enough for up, he said aloud. He bent and picked it up. Careless of the boy, he thought. He smiled faintly and put the mitten in his pocket. imagining how relieved Pup would be to get it back. And there we will stop for now.